Caroline, if you could address the issue of the guarantees again, because the yes side are focusing on that a lot. Thank you.
As a law student many years ago, if any of you here are law students, you'll all have heard of Lord Denning in England. He was beloved by every law student because he was such an eccentric, and the way in which he issued his decisions were always so human. And I want to tell you, no, don't shush, we'll just keep going now, okay? There was a case in 1974, around the same time as we joined the EU, in which Lord Denning said, "The Treaty of Rome does not touch any of the matters which concern solely England and the people in it." Now for this, think Ireland as well, please. He said, "These are still governed by English law. They are not affected by the treaty. But when we come to matters with a European element, the treaty is like an incoming tide. It flows into the estuaries and up the rivers. It cannot be held back. Parliament has decreed that the treaty is henceforth to be part of our law. It is equal in force to any statute." That was what he said in 1974. And it's very interesting, that's always quoted by people who want to give you a particular view on Europe. What they won't tell you is that Lord Denning had changed his mind quite a degree by the time it came to 1990, and he was asked to write the introduction to a book about the European Court of Justice. And the question was, were they judges or were they policy makers? And in 1990, that's a long time ago now, nearly 20 years ago, he said, "Our sovereignty has been taken away by the European Court of Justice. Our courts must no longer enforce our national laws. They must enforce community law. No longer is European law an incoming tide flowing up the estuaries of England. It is now like a tidal wave, bringing down our sea walls and flowing inland over our fields and houses to the dismay of all." I wonder if he were alive today, what he would say if he read the Lisbon Treaty. And I'm sure he would be, as I was, and as most of you were who've looked at it, Martin included, pretty horrified. I was interested to see at the Humbert Summer School, which was reported in the papers in the last 2 weeks, the comments that were made by Minister for Foreign Affairs Micheál Martin and the director of, what's the group he's calling himself now, Director of Ireland for Europe campaign, Pat Cox. And they had to say a number of interesting things. Minister Martin talked about the agreement they had achieved to retain a commissioner for every member state. But he didn't tell us that under the Lisbon Treaty, we were actually going to lose our right to decide who our commissioner would be. He then said that voting no would damage our future investment and job creation prospects. He said that the guarantees negotiated in Brussels constitute a legally binding international agreement. And not for the first time, he gives the impression that our choice would be yes to Lisbon or exile from the EU. And the posters that you see up and down the quays are saying the same. Mr. Cox, on his part, said that a yes vote, and I quote him, "keeps Ireland's European future in our hands." Now, anybody looking at the facts can see that the opposite is the situation. We know that under the Lisbon Treaty, the old European community is dissolved, a new body is created called the Union. For the first time, we become citizens of the Union. The European Court would decide our rights, and the European Charter would be superior to our Constitution. Lisbon would halve our voting weight to 0.8% in making EU laws, and our power to block legislation would be cut by 40%. It abolishes vetoes in over 60 areas, at least 30 of which are policy areas, which would enable the EU to make policy without any regard to Irish interest in these areas. And the biggest time bomb for me ticking away in the Lisbon Treaty is Article 48. And I'm sick of Dick Roach saying it is not self-amending. Let me explain to you in the simplest terms I can what it means. Article 48 would allow the EU leaders, our Taoiseach being one, to further empower the Union without any need for further treaty or referendum. Now the Taoiseach would need the permission of the Oireachtas, but the people would be taken out of the decision-making process. No other treaty has ever done this. That is crucial. Lisbon also allows the Union to establish a system of own resources to provide for, and I quote, "the means necessary to attain its objectives and carry through its policies." In other words, to impose taxes on its new European citizens, almost 500 million people. And looking at the way they have been able to account for over 100 billion being spent every year for the last decade, I wouldn't be happy with that. Foreign direct investment. I have told partners in the most senior of law firms in the city, and they didn't believe me until I proved to them, that under this treaty, foreign direct investment would become an exclusive competence of the EU. That means there will no longer be Irish foreign direct investment policy, there will be EU foreign direct investment policy, and only the EU could legislate, and only the EU could make legally binding agreements in the area of foreign direct investment. And despite the fact that we said no to Lisbon last year, you might be interested to know that last year there were over 8,800 jobs created in this country in the area of foreign direct investment, and it is worth 16 billion euros to our exchequer. So bear that in mind. We cannot, in this economic crisis, give up the tools that would help us to create more wealth. We are not yet ready to be generating new industries, new software, new whatever. We have to do that. We must foster entrepreneurship. We must help small and medium-sized businesses. But while we wait for them to become productive and income producing, we cannot afford to lose the tools that enable us to go out and bring in all the multinationals from whom we have benefited so richly over the years, and we've been able to supply them with a highly qualified workforce. We cannot afford to give that away. It would be sheer madness. Now, on the guarantees, I actually went out to get them. On the 2nd of October, we are not voting on the text of the Lisbon Treaty. We are voting on an amendment to our Constitution. Here it is. This amendment passed by the Dáil does not mention any Lisbon guarantees or give them any constitutional standing. Minister Martin talks of an international agreement, but no international agreement has been put before the Houses of the Oireachtas or given any standing in Irish law which would be required. The guarantees are also not part of any EU law. They may not be considered by the Irish courts or by the European Court of Justice. And the wording of the amendment suggests, and to more than me because I have checked it, that the Lisbon EU laws could lose their constitutional protection. In their haste to insert for the first time a commitment to the EU in our Irish constitution, it seems that they have lost a phrase that was rather valuable. The other thing I would say, and I hope Brendan and a whole lot of other people down there are listening to me carefully on this, in relation to the Charter, as I'm looking at it here, the guarantees speak of the provisions in the Lisbon Treaty attributing legal status to the Charter. They say nothing in the Treaty of Lisbon attributing legal status to the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union affects the scope and applicability of Article 40. They don't say that nothing in the Charter would affect the scope and applicability of Article 40. It's just nothing in the mechanism, the particular articles attributing legal status. I think you need to look at that a little bit further. So for me, I heard what Lennis Kinnock had to say, and I was very interested to hear the following day, the chairman of the House of Commons European Scrutiny Committee said, if the guarantees the Irish have got are legally binding, why do they need a protocol? Is this a stitch-up? And as far as I'm concerned, it's difficult not to agree with him. A no vote maintains the status quo, it's the only safe vote, and it is essential to keep our strength in Europe, because a yes vote diminishes our strength and is not the way we should go. And we will stay at the heart of Europe, and we will stay strong in Europe, because we will not agree to the dilution of our presence there, which the Lisbon Treaty presents. Thank you very much.
For delivering that under pressure so well. Thanks very much.